Hi, welcome to Inside Policy Talks, MLI's premier podcast on everything public policy. I'm Balkan Devlen. I'm the director of the Transatlantic Program here at MLI. And today, in this special episode that we will cover NATO Summit, I'm delighted to join by two friends and colleagues today who were on the ground in DC during the summit. First, we have the MLI's managing director, Dr. Brian Lee Crowley, and we also have the executive director for the Center for North American Prosperity and Security, Jamie Tronnes, with us today to share their perceptions and impressions from the NATO Summit in Washington, D.C. this week. Both of you, welcome. Let me go straight to you, Brian. You were in the NATO Public Forum, took part in the forum as well as some other side events. What was the mood down in Washington D.C.? What are your impressions apart from being too hot?
Well, at least we had air conditioning, so it was livable. Look, Balkan. First of all, in terms of atmospherics, what was the feeling at the NATO summit? Let's remember that this is the 75th anniversary of the founding of NATO. It arose from a treaty, the Washington Treaty, signed here 75 years ago. The impression that I took away was first and foremost the extent to which every NATO member feels that NATO itself as an agreement, as an alliance, has been a tremendous success. That every one of them feels that their influence in the world and their safety and security has been significantly improved by the existence of NATO, and that includes the United States, which is the most powerful military power in the world. That general impression of an alliance which is very much appreciated and supported by its members was made even more direct and poignant by, of course, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And it is very clear that the members of NATO, with one or two very minor exceptions, are completely committed to the mission of making sure that Vladimir Putin pays a very significant price for having violated the borders of a European country in an unprovoked war of aggression. Now, one of the things that was perhaps less clear, at least in my reading of the interventions by probably half a dozen prime ministers, a score of foreign and defense ministers from NATO countries, was that there's not agreement within NATO about what the end game is in terms of our intervention in Ukraine. The defense minister from Latvia, with whom, as you know, Canada has a very close relationship because we lead the NATO mission there, his view, clearly expressed on the platform, was we must drive Vladimir Putin and Russia out of Ukraine. A number of other leaders said, oh, no, our objective is to stop Vladimir Putin. Now, stopping Vladimir Putin can mean a lot of things, and perhaps we'll get into that in the rest of the discussion. The final impression that I'll share with you, Balkan, is that Canada, as a member of NATO, hangs its head in shame. NATO is, by its very nature, a mutual defense pact. In other words, every country that's a member of NATO makes a promise to every other country that's a member of NATO that if they are attacked, every member of the alliance will treat that as an attack on themselves. Now, that is a huge level of commitment. And in return for that commitment from the other 31 members of the NATO alliance, they ask Canada and the other members, they ask them to make sure that they have the capacity to be one of those defenders in the case of, invoking of Article 5 and the requirement to defend a member of NATO. And NATO has set this 2% of GDP goal, or minimum really, that this is what the alliance regards as a sufficient promise to have the capacity to be a useful member of the alliance in the case of any kind of military attack on the alliance. And Canada is one of 7, I believe, out of 32 members, which has consistently failed over the last couple of decades to meet that requirement. And it's also failing to meet that requirement at a time when every other NATO member recognizes that the strength of the alliance is more important than ever, precisely because, for example, of Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine, which is right on the border of NATO. But we're also talking increasingly about the Indo-Pacific and military and mis and disinformation threats and so on, which affect the entire alliance. So the view, in my estimation, of Canada amongst the NATO allies is that we are a shameless free rider on the efforts of other members of the alliance, that we want the benefits that come from NATO membership, the promise of security, without paying the price. And I'm here to tell you that nobody at the NATO summit was impressed by Trudeau's alleged plan to get to 2%. A plan to get to 2% is not 2%. And our other allies have very quickly got to 2% over the last couple of years. Many of them had not done so in recent memory, but the bulk of the alliance moved very quickly to get to 2% just in the last few years. And Canada is a laggard, and Canadians have every reason not to be able to look our NATO allies in the eye and say we're doing our job.
No, I mean, that's an extremely important point. And also the plan is not really a plan. It's basically a date pulled out of thin air. When asked, Prime Minister Trudeau said that, well, the details on how we're going to get there will be laid out 4 years from now in 2028 with the defense policy update. A promise he is unlikely needing to keep up, given that the elections are coming and their fortunes don't look particularly great. So it is basically a number that came up without any plan. It's just a number. And of course, it undermines Canada's credibility, influence, and security going forward when our allies look at us and say that, well, can we trust Canada to do its part? Jamie, let me turn to you. You attended a number of events on the sidelines, and this is Washington, D.C. Of course, there were tons of things going on. Must be quite interesting. Give us a bit of your sense outside the public forum, as both the public forum as well as the official summit going on. What are the sort of the things that have been discussed mostly around that you think the Canadians need to be aware of, particularly when it comes to the mission for CNAPS? That there is a reason why the name is Center for North American Prosperity and Security. It's about how United States and Canada can forge closer links and ensure that we contribute to each other's security and prosperity and not be a liability to each other. What's your take on the summit?
Yeah, thanks for asking, Balkan, and thanks for having me. I was very surprised to see just how shocked members of the Canadian delegation were at the cold reception they received in Washington. It shouldn't have come as a surprise. I'm sure Minister Bill Blair, the defense minister from Canada, has certainly felt that cold shoulder on his trips down here. But to see just how shocked the Prime Minister was at his reception down here, and that he couldn't spin his way out of it by doing the usual trickery that he does, where he poses on Instagram running in DC, and that changes the subject, or he announces the Climate Change Center of Excellence that was actually lambasted in a offhand comment by the Estonian defense minister. A lot of these sort of sideline feel-good things that Canada has done in the past just aren't cutting it anymore, particularly in the aftermath of Vladimir Putin, as the Lithuanian foreign affairs minister called it, sending a postcard to NATO by bombing the children's hospital in Kyiv. Against that backdrop, it's hard to say defend your lack of spending, your lack of movement, the lack of capabilities that Canada has, and that we're really not contributing our fair share to NATO, particularly when you think about smaller countries like Estonia, the Baltic countries, where there was a defense panel from 3 of the Baltic countries' defense ministers that I attended on the Tuesday morning, and they were all very frustrated with other countries failing to meet the 2%. Some of them, the Latvian defense minister, for example, was calling for it to be higher. The Estonian defense minister was calling for it to be higher. They've all individually said they're going to be spending far more than 2%. That 2% is, as was echoed throughout the conference, it's the floor, not the ceiling. And the Estonian defense minister, when he was asked about what he felt, how Trump would react to this, would he be elected, he said, Trump understands golf courses. You want to come and play golf, you got to pay the membership fee. You want to be in the club, you got to pay your dues. And that is what we're probably expecting that Trump will expect from NATO. And we're paying our dues. And we want him to know that. And we want, other allies and other in the alliance to remember that as well. So it was a bit of a sobering panel to see that. And then, the day before that, also Speaker Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, he had spoken at the Hudson Institute, and he called it shameful and said, talk about riding on America's coattails when it comes to Canada and our lack of seriousness when it comes to defending our own country. And so there was a lot of discussion about Canada way before the delegation even arrived in Washington, and the mood was very much focused on Canada and not in a positive way. So just the extent of, the blood in the water around Canada on this, I think, shook the Prime Minister when he arrived. And that's why it was very interesting to hear from members of the Canadian media who were in his traveling with him, that they had been shut out from all the ministers. They were not given access to any of the cabinet ministers. They were not allowed to talk to anyone. They were given access to officials on background who would say things like, we're going to have an announcement maybe tomorrow, with no details given. Various reports coming out that they were getting so frustrated. They came all the way down here to Washington to try and get a story. And the story was becoming, Canada is a real big problem for the NATO alliance. So all the pre-events really were taking a focus on that 2%, and really also trying to focus on the fact that this is an alliance. It's a group of countries. It goes far beyond one country. All the countries would love to spend on things like, healthcare and social security and all of that, but they're at an existential crisis. And if we don't take that seriously, we're going to have other problems.
No, absolutely, and I think what I call announcement as policy, the brand that the current government excels as continues down there, but it also shows the bubble that they live in. I mean, this is a theme that we have been beating the drum for years, saying that look, our allies are not satisfied. They're frustrated. You will pay a price for this. You cannot really muddle through. And when we talk about, particularly on the political side, people will generally dismiss it. They say, oh, no, they're all nice and everybody's happy. Well, the reality has a habit of slapping back. And this is, I think, what happens. And that's why they scrambled to basically reheat the submarine announcement from the DPU and then just pull up a number when it comes to defense spending. I don't remember who said it. I want to stay with you, Jamie, for one more second. Who said it? But it was from a business community in Canada. When they get down to the DC and they want to talk about trade and economics and so on and so forth, the first thing the Americans across the political spectrum. This is not a Republican issue. This is not a Trump issue. This is a cross the bipartisan consensus in the United States. Whether you talk to Democratic members or the Republican members of Congress, you bring the trade, Team Canada, etc. Americans go, well, what are you doing for the Arctic? What are you doing for defense, etc. Right? And I think that lack of understanding, due to the bubble that the Ottawa has, will have significant ramifications. And do you have a sense that this summit though popped that bubble a little bit? That the belief that we can muddle through and Instagram our way out of the NATO summit didn't work out. Now we really got to get serious. Or do you think the Trudeau government will double down on its performative aspects, but not so much deliver on substance?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was Goldie Hyder from the Canadian Business Council, and they've been very vocal down here saying that America is tying national security and being a viable partner and ally to trade, and that is something that Canada is realizing. We are entering into the Canadian, U.S., Mexico trade agreement renewal in 2026. So there's going to be a review, and there could be a change in president. But even if there isn't a change in the presidency, there's proclivity toward protectionism here in the U.S. at the moment, and Canada has no leverage when it comes to trying to renegotiate and look at the terms of what is formerly known as NAFTA, the CUSMA trade deal. And that is something that business is very concerned about. Trump has said he's going to put a 10% tariff across the board. And if Canada cannot demonstrate that it is the best friend and ally to the United States, that we're going to be with them through thick and thin in times of war and peace, in times of prosperity and in times of challenges, then why would they continue to give us everything we asked for in a trade agreement? We have no leverage. And I think that is starting to really dawn on the government when they were down here, when they were getting it from all sides. Even Trudeau went up to the Hill, and members of the Senate were leaking that they were yelling at him in private. It was really bad. It was very bad. And there's a group of Americans down here in the Congress, the ACES Congress, and they really are bipartisan, and they want to help Canada when it comes to our shared bilateral issues and the border and stuff. But they have nothing to go on, and Canada's not making it easy for them to make the case that we're a trusted ally when it comes to us being laggards on spending and simply not getting the message to get things done and to do it quickly, which is the other issue down here.
No, I think that's an extremely important point. And again, emphasizes the thesis of CNAPS, the interlinked very nature, very sort of close connections between prosperity and security. And therefore, you just can't have, as I like to say, people talk about, guns versus butter, right? Social spending versus defense spending. But the notion is that if you don't have the guns, soon you will not have the butter either, right? So it is important that we actually need to focus on that. Brian, let me turn to you, both in terms of the what this summit says about the central thesis of CNAPS, about the connection between prosperity and security within North American context, but also another important theme that we here at the Institute have been talking a lot, and the China-Russia cooperation, which was highlighted in very stark terms again in the communique, calling the greatest enabler of Russian. China is called the greatest enabler for Russian aggression in Ukraine. What was your sort of impressions and conversations surrounding China, and what the allies' impressions of the role of China as a threat to transatlantic security?
Yes, well, believe me, this is very much in the minds of everyone in NATO. And this was, I believe, the third NATO summit in which there were 4 NATO partners from the Indo-Pacific, that's to say Japan, South Korea, New Zealand, and Australia, who attended and were part of the conversation about, how they can work with NATO to defend NATO's interests in the Indo-Pacific. And of course, when we're talking about the Indo-Pacific, it's really a shorthand for for China. The discussion around China's role in helping underpin Russia's efforts in Ukraine was wide-ranging and involved many of the people who appeared on the platform at the summit. We know that China is probably the principal foreign supplier of Russia's materiel to prosecute the war. Not that they're selling complete missile systems, but rather they're giving the technology, the chips and everything else that Russia can then assemble. So this Russia-China axis, which is not only present militarily in Ukraine, but also, the mis and disinformation efforts, which are being carried out by both of those powers in order to disrupt societies in the NATO alliance, in order to sap the political and moral will of the alliance to prosecute the military campaign. Because it's one thing to spend 2% of GDP, have the weaponry that you need to defend yourselves, but to lack the will to use it. And this is an important point of vulnerability, which both Russia and China are very actively exploiting. Just as an example, I spoke at an event in Alberta just the other day, and when I was done, and it was mostly a talk about China. When I was done, 3 of the 4 questions could have been written by Vladimir Putin's Kremlin. It was all about, you say Ukraine's a democracy, but it's not. They don't have elections anymore, and Ukraine attacked Russians in the Donbass, and that justifies the invasion. I mean, this is exactly the kind of misinformation that Russia and China are busy propagating within our societies in order to undermine the political consensus that exists or that has traditionally existed, that we as an alliance are not an aggressive alliance. We are not an offensive alliance. We are a defensive alliance to protect the things that we value about our own societies, democracy, the rule of law, and so on. So these were things that were very much in the minds of the leaders of the NATO countries at the summit.
Let me here highlight a recent study by our very own Marcus Kolga and the Disinfo Watch about the impact of Russian and Chinese disinformation efforts in Canada and on Canadians' perceptions for both support for NATO, but also for support for Ukraine. And as you pointed out, the fundamental component is to sow distrust, fear, and indecision. And for those who would like to read more about that, they can visit the Disinfo Watch website or MLI's website to find the report. And Global Mail have extensively covered it this week. So again, we at the Institute have been warning Canadians about this for years. And a recent revelations in Politico that the Russians had plans to assassinate the CEO of Rheinmetall, the largest defense producer in Europe, in Germany, and that the German and US intelligence prevented that assassination. And this is only one of the assassination plots targeting defense industry executives in Europe by Russia. Is again a sign in which our enemies, and let's call them what they are our enemies, try to undermine our society and engage in war against us. And China and Russia are working towards it. And there's a reason why we have, again, maybe making a little commercial here, but the Double Trouble project supported by the Konrad Adenauer Foundation's Canada office. We focus on the double trouble of Russia and China, and try to bring the awareness to the Canadians that this is a security threat. We're coming to an end here. I just want to end on asking all of you if you want the Canadians to have a 1-minute sort of message from the NATO summit that you would like to deliver. What would that be? What would you like to focus on on Canadians to take away from the summit. Jamie, let me start with you, and then I'll end with Brian.
Yeah, I think it would be just that the times have changed, and our security in Canada and our prosperity are linked. And the peace of that followed the Cold War is over. We need to prepare for the worst, if for nothing else than to be a deterrent from the worst.
Exactly. There is we generally talk about the peace through strength, and that there is actually a continuation of that quote coming from a Roman emperor. It goes, peace through strength. If not peace through fighting. It actually is about having the capability to carry out that, not so much just the words, but having the capability to defend and fight if need be. Brian, what's the one thing that the Canadians need to sort of? What's the one key takeaway from the summit for the Canadians?
That we live in an increasingly dangerous world, in which NATO is our best guarantee of peace and security, as has been demonstrated over the entire 75 years of its existence. And that if we want to continue to be a country that has influence and access to the markets and the diplomatic and other resources of our friends and allies, we must be prepared to do our share to protect those things that we value and that NATO was created to protect. Canada at the moment, its stock is very low. Our friends and allies do not believe that we are a serious player. And that this will have consequences, not just in terms of our peace and security and the future of NATO, but our ability to get our friends and allies to pay attention to the things that we're interested in. The diplomatic world is a world of give and take, and our friends and allies see Canada as a taker and not a giver. And if we allow this impression to become a settled one, Canada will pay a price across every front that involves us talking and seeking help and involvement from our friends and allies.
I think that's a very important point, and hopefully the messages got through the Ottawa bubble, and that bubble popped up a little bit. On this sobering note, it's important to note that we will at the Institute continue to make the case for a stronger, more active Canada for our own prosperity and security, as well as for the prosperity and security of our allies. Jamie, Brian, thank you so very much for joining me today for the Inside Policy Talks, and thanks for our listeners and audience and for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.